Welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. I'm Aaron Breitman, back with David Anderson doing positional previews for Rutgers football ahead of the 2023 season. This episode will focus on the linebackers. Last year, Tyreen Powell and Deion Jennings pretty much played every snap between the two of them in that 4-2-5 defense for Greg Schiano and defensive coordinator Joe Harris-Simiak back again. And this year, Rutgers does have more depth at linebacker. But first, let's start with the starters. David, thoughts on Powell and Jennings coming back?
Well, first of all, I'm happy that they did. I don't know if either of them was really a surefire, let's say, unsigned free agent with the NFL this past year. But, I mean, another year of what they did, and it's going to be hard to ignore. I mean, Deion Jennings was the 11th overall rated linebacker in the conference on a lot more snaps because of how often the Rutgers defense was on the field than a lot of his peers, and he scored in the top 10 as probably most notably as seventh ranked linebacker in coverage, which makes sense because even when he was playing safety, I felt pretty good about him. Even during the Ash era, I think he had one interception at the goal line against Penn State that was just like amazing play.
Oh, yeah.
And people forgot about him because of both injuries and he was playing behind a lot of guys who
Yes.
an NFL look, so it's hard to say the coaching staff made the wrong choice. But I really the least surprised person that he had that good of a season because he always gave us in a small sample size a reason to believe that he could both make plays and that he would be reliable enough in coverage, having been a former safety, that he wouldn't get a lot of times you only notice a guy at linebacker if he's either making a huge hit or getting burned. And he was not getting burned.
Yeah.
So I was quite pleased with Deion Jennings. I mean, in terms of Tyreen Powell, I'm very surprised at how quickly he's been able to reach the level that he has. I mean, this is a guy who in high school was playing cornerback a lot of times defensively. He was playing quarterback on offense for his high school. And so you would have thought that it was going to take him a lot more time to kind of generate the skills necessary to play linebacker, especially in a 4-2-5. But I mean, he was a legitimate Big Ten starter as well. I mean, I think he was ranked 21st best in coverage for a linebacker as well, which means you had two of the better guys for that position in coverage. So you got to figure if Rutgers can be in more obvious passing situations, they might be able to either generate more turnovers or they might at least be able to just keep everything in front of them and prevent offenses from converting if they have to go to the air. So I don't think you couldn't possibly expect more out of those two guys, and they're back for another year.
Yeah, I think that was definitely an upgrade. As good as the linebackers were before them, for so many years, coverage was always an issue with that entire group, I think, for the most part. So definite upgrade in both of those last year. Vineland has been very good to Rutgers with Pacheco and now
For
Powell
sure.
in terms of just their contributions. But I think that the question now is, are they going to be the same, reliable, productive, solid, or do they have the potential to take that leap forward and be closer to, very good to elite status?
It's a good question. I mean, I think with a little bit less workload, because if the offense can do a little bit more, or they get a little bit of help from Toure. I mean, we don't know how many snaps he's going to play at linebacker versus defensive end, for example,
Right.
but he had a huge interception in that win against Purdue like 3 years ago now. I mean, and he played linebacker to a pretty good level. I mean, he kind of had the opposite problem where because of that logjam at linebacker, Mo Toure was playing some edge when in other circumstances he would have been playing linebacker. So does he have that foot speed? Is he going to be able to play coverage? Or can he at least play some snaps to give those other guys a little bit of a rest? I mean, I know at linebacker, they say you kind of want a rotation, but it's not the same as cornerback or defensive line. You really want to go with your guys if you can.
Yeah.
But if you have players who bring a different skill set, then you have to play them and see what they can do. And that kind of leads us to Moses Walker, because no joke, he was the number one rated prospect coming out of New York, and then even last year in spring, right when he got injured, he was turning heads. And I mean, I don't know if we've had a playmaker what he's projected as at that position since Kasim Green. And with all due respect to 03, I mean, Fatukasi was a great player who's in the NFL now, but there's a possibility that Moses Walker is better than that by the end of this season. And if he's doing that well, he's going to have to see the field.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think he's a guy that is just going to get more and more time. I think what's fascinating is we know. I mean, and Shiano, this is actually one of my questions going into preseason camp, and Shiano answered it on day one. They're a 4-2-5. They're not going to play three linebackers because they have better depth now. I mean, it's great. It's a great problem to have, right? I mean, they have four legitimate linebackers now in the mix for two spots. And yeah, how much do they rotate? How much do they use Teray on the edge? I think we talked about this in the defensive line preview, but I think Teray will play a lot on the edge and along that defensive line somewhat. But the question is, with Jennings and Powell, how does Moses Walker, get time, and what does he do with it? Obviously, early on in the season, again, hopefully, knock on wood, they have a couple comfortable wins where he plays towards the end. And, he starts to get his feet wet. Well, I guess one question I wanted to ask you is how does it work with, like, who's kind of the quarterback on the defense on the linebackers right now, and how much does that go into play in terms of how they work to Walker in? I believe it is Jennings, right, who calls the plays?
I thought it was more so Powell or even one of the safeties last year.
You know what? It probably was the safeties last year, yeah.
Because, I mean, with Izzian playing so close to the line, it seemed like he was –
it probably was him, you're right.
He was kind of responsible for communication on the entire back end. But, I mean, with Jennings and Powell, I guess the other positive is you probably feel pretty confident in either one of them doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen both of them speak eloquently. So, and I think that the defense – coaching staff on this defense does a pretty good job of making it simple, fast. And so I think that is probably, but that's a good point, because with Avery Young and Christian Izzian gone, our listeners can hear more about that when we talk about this defensive backfield. Like, will it impact their play if they have to spend more time getting people lined up, especially at the safety spot, so that they have less time to react right after, like to read the play before the snap? I mean, probably not, but that's a fair question.
Yeah, I mean, as we're talking about it, that kind of is a huge thing, right, for the defense to with those people took for granted those guys in the back of the defense, but they're gone now. So yeah, it's more responsibility on those linebackers to be able to run the defense. And also, I'm looking at it from a rotational standpoint. Like, you don't want to be rotating in the linebacker that's, like rotating in and out linebackers that are calling the defensive formations, or, making the reads and working with Harasimiak on it in terms of adjustments. So, that'll be interesting to see. I'm surprised no one's asked that question yet in the media in terms of how that's going to go.
Yeah, I mean, on my team, college, we had basically two guys who, if either one of them was on the field, they were the ones who led the defensive huddle. With less huddling, I think that's less of a concern, because a lot of times they're getting the signals from the sideline.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of last-minute checks that have to be made. And I think they might miss Christian Izzian in that regard.
Yeah.
So can these guys pick up a slack from another position group? Kind of like what we talked about on the defensive line is, can they be playmakers? Can they pick up some of that playmaking that was lost from some of the safeties and, Christian Brassel moving off at corner? Like, can the linebackers take some other responsibilities off the plate of the level behind them, right? That would be a nice thing to happen. and then you might feel a little bit more comfortable with some of the inexperienced guys in the game. I mean, the NFL is different because in the NFL you get the headset.
Mhm.
So, like for the Jets, as much as fans want to rag on C.J. Mosley, like he's got the headset. So unless he's injured, he's not coming out. It's
Right.
basically like, but in college, it's a little bit different because again, more of the signals are coming in from the sideline, so everyone should be able to see them. They don't need to just kind of go into the headset and get it,
Yeah.
right? So it's a little bit different, but they probably
How
feel
how
pretty
much
confident.
how much do you think? Obviously, with the 4-2-5 staying the way it is, but having a different mix of personnel at linebacker. Do you think we see any different type of not philosophy or scheming per se, but do you think maybe Harris Simiak might be a little bit more aggressive at times? And maybe we haven't really seen a lot of blitzing out of the linebackers.
But when they did do it, they were good.
Right.
It might have
So
been
is
the
that
element
something
of
maybe we're going to see
surprise.
more of?
I don't know. I mean, I think, and again, we're kind of bleeding into the safety conversation a little bit. I think a lot depends on Dixon or whoever else is taking the Christian Izzian role
Yeah.
because last year they felt so comfortable. Really, the last 2 years they felt so comfortable playing a safety even closer at times to the line of scrimmage than one of the linebackers. If they don't feel as comfortable about that this season, then yes, rather than seeing a safety or a nickel cornerback blitz like the one we saw from Shaquan Loyal, which resulted in pick
Yeah.
six, like instead of them coming, is it going to be a linebacker? And they've shown again pretty good blitzing success rates. Now, except of those top guys. Anyway,
All right. So we know those four guys pretty much are the cogs of the linebacking core. Any last thoughts on linebacker and anybody potentially in the future, or you never know that could step up at some point in the linebacking role.
yeah, I mean, Jameer Ray Collins is a guy who was playing running back out of necessity, looked pretty good. And kind of my read on that situation was they kind of saw him as a big back who, had some athletic ability. But it almost seemed from a timeline perspective, and again, I have no inside knowledge of this, but it almost seemed like once they realized Sam Brown could be a monster as a big back, that that kind of happened at the same time where they realized they really needed him at linebacker. So
Yeah.
perhaps with another year, I mean, at least on special teams, he should be a big contributor. And then there's been some hype around walk on Timmy Hinksbetter, who's also from Don Bosco, another walk on like Christian Drummond of the defense. But to me, the guy who I see as one who will take the biggest leap maybe between this year and next year or 2 years from now is Abram Wright. I mean, he played in the spring game, and no one would have been able to pick out by the eyes that he was a true freshman. Like he was playing and he was making plays. He wasn't like a superstar, but for a guy who is just first time playing college football, I was quite impressed. And so if you get the development of Walker or I mean, there's a number of other guys who we thought were going to play linebacker that are currently playing other positions. Like
Yeah.
I think Abram Wright, I mean, almost doing crossover basketball talk. Like if you have certain players who are one and dones, you kind of want those guys, who are coming in that you're like, all right, this guy's gonna should be with this program 3 to 4 years, and we need him to be a solid starter for us in 3 years. And that's kind of where I see Abram Wright, even if right now he doesn't get a lot of snaps. Like I wouldn't be too concerned about that on defense, but we should see a lot of him and Wright Collins and Jabomi, the Canadian product who played all 12 games on special teams last year. Not sure if there's a role for him on the defense, but by having all this depth, do all these guys get special teams reps, or do you even feel more comfortable playing Jennings on special teams? Because I know Shiano likes to play his starters on special teams. Last year, it was a huge risk to do that, but maybe you see that as well. So those are a couple other kind of fallout that can come with more depth.
All great points, great insight. Once again, thank you so much, David, and thank you for listening and watching this positional preview linebackers. And check out the Scarlet Faithful and YouTube, Apple, where all the podcasts are. All our positional previews will be there leading up to the 23-23 season. And thanks for listening once again.